Welcome to Forgotten Worlds for Sleep, where history breathes again through stories whispered in the dark. Here, the past is not distant. It's alive, glowing beneath the sands, carved into stone, and written among the stars. Tonight, we journey to the heart of ancient Egypt, a world where life and death were not opposites, but two halves of the same eternal rhythm, where temples were built as mirrors of the cosmos, and the souls of men walked beside the gods. You'll follow the sacred river, hear the hymns of forgotten priests, and drift through the underworld with the rising sun, from the birth of creation to the judgment of the soul. This is the story of the eternal gods of the Nile, a tale of order, chaos, and the dream of immortality. So close your eyes, let the waters of the Nile carry you beyond time, and as the stars awaken, listen, for even after 4,000 years, the gods still whisper. The story of Egypt begins with silence, a golden hush over endless sands. Then a sound, the whisper of water, the Nile eternal and patient, cutting through the desert like a vein of life itself. Each year it rose from the south, swelling with silt and mystery, flooding the land until even the barren edges bloomed with green. And each year, when the waters receded, the people found life renewed, as if creation itself had started over. To the ancient Egyptians, this was no ordinary river. It was a god, a moving pulse of eternity that bound heaven and earth, life and death. They called it Itaru, the life giver, the bringer of order in a world of chaos. On its banks, humanity first learned to listen, not just to the rush of water, but to the rhythm beneath it. That rhythm would become their religion, their architecture, their very understanding of existence. Here, at the meeting of gold and green, the first stories began, not written in ink, but in flood and harvest, not carved by hand, but by the river's patient motion. When the sun rose over the rippling surface, it was not merely morning, it was the god Ra reborn. When the Nile withdrew and left behind black soil, it was Osiris, the Lord of renewal, rising from death. In this eternal cycle, Egyptians found meaning. Everything dies, yet nothing ends. From the rhythm of the Nile came the rhythm of time. The people divided their world into dualities, upper and lower, life and death, day and night, chaos and order, believing that every force had its twin. This harmony of opposites became the heartbeat of their myths, their politics, their art. To live was to balance between extremes, to walk the narrow strip of fertile land between burning desert and devouring flood. As villages rose along the riverbanks, they grew into small kingdoms, each with its own symbols, its own gods, the falcon of Upper Egypt, the cobra of Lower. And when those lands finally united under one ruler, the Nile became not just a source of water, but of destiny. It taught the first pharaohs that kingship was not power, it was balance. To rule Egypt meant to sustain the same order the river upheld, steady, cyclical, eternal. But the people did not simply watch the river, they mirrored it. Their hearts learned to flood with hope, to recede with loss, to return again renewed. Each sunrise was a prayer, each sunset a surrender. When the wind whispered through the papyrus reeds, it carried both memory and prophecy. The idea that the gods themselves might once have walked beside the Nile's banks. And perhaps they did. In the imagination of the people, the river was the cradle where the divine first awoke. Some said the first mound of earth rose from its waters, glistening beneath the newborn sun, the very spot where creation began. From that sacred hill, they said, the first god stretched his hand toward the sky and breathed the world into motion. The Nile, it seemed, was not only the sustainer of life, it was the remnant of that first moment of order. At night, when the stars shimmered over its surface, the river became a mirror of the heavens. The Egyptians looked upward and saw the reflection of their own journey. The constellations told them stories. The great mother goddess, not arching across the sky, Orion as Osiris, eternally reborn. Even death was not an end. It was another form of travel, a voyage westward toward the setting sun, where the soul would cross the same celestial waters to reach the fields of eternity. And so for them, to live by the Nile was to live within a story without end, a myth unfolding with every sunrise and flood. They saw no separation between the physical and the spiritual. The same current that nourished their crops also carried prayers to the gods. Life and afterlife were two banks of the same river, and the heart was the boat that crossed between them. Centuries passed, dynasties rose and fell, but through it all, the Nile kept flowing, whispering its ageless lesson. That creation is not a single act, but a rhythm. That death is not defeat, but renewal. That even in the harshest desert, order can bloom if tended with faith. And so began Egypt's greatest inheritance, not its pyramids, nor its gold, nor even its gods, but its idea that the world itself is a living story, one written in water, sunlight, and time. A story that, once begun, could never truly end. Before Egypt became a kingdom, before the first stones were raised in honor of the gods, there were only villages, scattered along the bends of the river, clinging to the edge of existence. The people watched the water rise and fall, watched the sky blaze and fade, watched the stars turn above their reed huts. They didn't yet have names for what they saw, only awe. In those early centuries, belief wasn't carved in temples. It lived in the breath of the wind, in the trembling of the palms when the flood returned. The world spoke to them, and they answered in stories. They began to whisper about the power behind the flood, not just rain from distant lands, but the will of unseen beings. When thunder rolled, they imagined a god striding through the clouds. When the moon vanished, they believed it had been swallowed by darkness, only to be reborn. Every mystery became a message, every moment of beauty, proof that something divine was near. But these early Egyptians did not fear their gods. They respected them, bargained with them, sang to them. Unlike the stormy pantheons of later empires, Egypt's gods were not enemies of mankind. They were partners in survival. They governed not through terror, but through balance. The first farmers left small offerings at the river's edge. A few grains of barley, a carved fish, a piece of bread baked in the morning sun. To give was to acknowledge the unseen, to honor the flow of life itself. And when the river rose gently and their fields turned green, they believed their gratitude had been heard. From this faith, order emerged. Each village adopted its own guardian spirit, a crocodile, a falcon, a cow, a cat. The animals were not worshipped as beasts. They were masks through which divine power could be glimpsed. In every form of nature, the Egyptians saw intention. The hiss of a cobra was not fearsome, but sacred. The flight of a falcon was not random, but revelation. Over time, these local beliefs intertwined, like tributaries merging into the great river. One region honored Sobuk, the crocodile who ruled the waters. Another prayed to Hathor, the cow who nourished the world with her milk. In the north, priests spoke of Adam, the god who had shaped himself out of nothing. And in the south, they praised Khnum, the potter who molded life from clay. Each city believed its god was the first, yet all acknowledged the others. For in the Egyptian heart, contradiction was harmony. As trade grew along the Nile, so too did the traffic of ideas. Priests began to travel, carrying sacred songs and stories between temples. They compared myths, recorded symbols, and sought patterns among the divine. By the time the first pharaohs rose, Egypt's spiritual landscape had already taken shape. A grand constellation of gods, each distinct yet interconnected. But something more profound stirred beneath these myths. A sense that divinity wasn't far away. It was woven into everything. Every rock held a fragment of creation. Every human carried a spark of the gods. To live with awareness was to live in constant dialogue with the sacred. This idea, that the divine and mortal were reflections of each other, became the foundation of Egyptian civilization. It shaped how they built, how they ruled, how they prepared for death. For if gods could take human form, then perhaps humans could aspire to divine endurance. In the desert night, under skies unpolluted by time, the first stargazers watched constellations drift across eternity. They saw Osiris in Orion's belt, Isis in the star Sirius, Horus in the rising sun. The heavens became a mirror of their myths, a celestial reminder that life was a cycle, not a straight line. Birth, decay, death, and renewal, each phase necessary, each sacred. These were not people running from mortality. They were people learning to embrace it. They built no walls against the inevitable. They prepared for it with ceremony and psalm. Their faith was not a fear of death, but a reverence for the rhythm that bound all things. And so, as Egypt slowly transformed from scattered villages to a single kingdom, its people were already united by something deeper than conquest, a shared vision of the universe as an ordered, breathing whole. When the first kings rose to power, they inherited more than land and labor. They inherited a sacred duty to maintain the harmony between heaven and earth. A pharaoh would not merely rule, he would balance. His crown would symbolize not dominance, but responsibility. The same responsibility the Nile bore each year as it rose and fell, nourishing and restraining, giving and taking. By the dawn of Egypt's first dynasty, belief had already become the backbone of identity. The temples were not yet stone. They were made of reeds and sunlight. But in every offering, every hymn, every carved line in the mud, one truth echoed louder than any other. That life was sacred because it ended. That death was sacred because it transformed. And that somewhere, beyond the horizon of this life, the river of eternity continued to flow, endlessly, silently, beautifully. For the people of the Nile, this was the dawn of belief, the moment humanity first looked into the face of the divine and saw, reflected back, its own reflection. Before the Nile flowed, before stars cast their first light, before even silence had a name, there was none. Not water as humans know it, but an infinite sea of possibility. No sky, no land, no life, only darkness, motionless and eternal, waiting to remember itself. From this endless abyss, the Egyptians believed the world was born. Creation was not a sudden act, but a stirring, a slow awakening within the waters of chaos. Out of nothing came awareness, and from awareness, shape. The surface quivered. A mound rose from the depths, dripping with the essence of eternity. This was the Benben, the first land, the place where the universe took its first breath. On that mound stood the first being Adam, self-created, self-aware, the one who emerged from the many. He had no parents, no rival, no form before form existed. He was both male and female, both seed and soil, both question and answer. The Egyptians imagined him lifting his face toward the newborn light, exhaling the first wind, whispering the first word. With that breath, the world began to move. Adam's first children were the air and the moisture, Shu and Tefnut, born from his own essence. They drifted out into the void, shaping space itself. From their union came Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky. Lovers locked together until Adam forced them apart, raising Nut above as the canopy of heaven. Between them stretched the world of mortals yet to come, the space where order would someday take root. It was here that the Egyptians placed the birth of everything. Time, distance, emotion, longing, love. The cosmos for them was not mechanical, it was alive. Every dawn was a reenactment of that first rising mound. Every flood of the Nile was none returning to cradle creation again. But chaos never disappeared. None was not destroyed, it simply stepped aside. It lingered beyond the stars, beneath the ground, at the edge of every dream. The Egyptians knew that creation was fragile, that the world hung like a lotus blooming upon deep waters, always in danger of being swallowed once more. That is why every sunrise mattered. It wasn't just light, it was victory. To them, chaos was not evil. It was the necessary opposite of order. Without darkness, light could not shine. Without silence, the voice of the gods could not be heard. So long as humanity remembered to honor balance, the world would continue. But if they forgot, if they let their hearts grow careless, none would rise again, and everything would return to stillness. In the temples that would one day stand along the Nile, priests would pour sacred water from golden vessels, whispering prayers that echoed this primordial memory. The water wasn't mere purification, it was a reminder. Each drop symbolized the sea before creation, the boundary between existence and oblivion. By reenacting the first moment, they kept the world alive. And yet, the Egyptians saw beauty even in that darkness. None was not fear, it was potential. It was the infinite waiting to be shaped, the blank canvas of eternity. When they gazed into the black waters of night, they didn't see emptiness. They saw the womb of creation itself, deep and timeless. Sometimes they imagined none speaking in silence. All things return to me, but nothing is ever lost. For the Egyptians, this truth was both comfort and warning. Civilizations would rise and fall. Kings would live and die. But the cycle would continue: creation, decay, renewal. The gods themselves would fade into the sea only to emerge anew, wearing different names, different faces. Every temple, every tomb, every carving of eternity began here, in that dark ocean of potential. The myth of none wasn't merely a story of the past. It was a pattern for all things to come. When a child was born, it was Adam rising again. When the Nile flooded, it was none reborn. When a soul entered the afterlife, it was the mound emerging from darkness once more. The Egyptians saw this not as superstition, but as rhythm. They lived by it, died by it, built their world around it. To them, the cosmos was not a straight line, but a circle, a sacred loop where beginning and end kissed like the horizon over the river. And so, in their hearts, the ocean before time never truly ended. It pulsed beneath every heartbeat, shimmered behind every sunrise. The people of the Nile carried it in their stories, in their songs, in the sacred silence between breaths. For they understood something the modern world often forgets: that creation is not a single act lost in ancient time, but a choice renewed with every dawn. And as the golden sun rose once more over the river's edge, its light rippling across the still waters, the Egyptians whispered a truth that had no beginning and no end. All comes from the waters, all returns to them, and in between, we live the dream of the gods. In the beginning, there was nothing but water, darkness, and silence, and then movement. From the endless sea of none, a mound rose, gleaming with the moisture of eternity. Upon it stood Adam, the first god, alone beneath the newborn sky that had yet to open. He looked upon the black waters surrounding him and felt the ache of solitude. He was everything, and yet nothing reflected him. So, in the stillness of that first dawn, Adam reached inward, summoning creation from his own being. He drew breath and exhaled the first wind. From that sacred breath came Shu, the god of air, who filled the void with motion. Then, from the tears of his joy, he formed Tefnut, goddess of moisture, who softened the dry mound with her touch. Together, they became the first family, the breath and the dew of life. They drifted into the dark horizon, seeking their place in the newborn cosmos. Adam watched them vanish and felt the pain of loss, the first sorrow, the first longing. Time passed, though time had no meaning yet. The waters trembled again, and in the distance, he saw two figures returning from the edge of chaos. His children had found each other. From their union came Geb, the earth, firm and steady, and Nut, the sky, vast and luminous. But Nut loved Geb too deeply. She bent down to embrace him, refusing to let go. Their love crushed the space between heaven and earth. Life suffocated in their closeness. Adam, weary but resolute, ordered Shu to separate them, to lift Nut high above, arching her body across the heavens, while Geb lay below, forming the solid ground. Their cries echoed through eternity, and every sunset became a reminder of their longing. Thus the world was born from both love and separation, and every Egyptian would live in that tension between closeness and distance, between heaven and earth. Upon Nut's belly, the stars were born. Each night she swallowed the sun, and each morning she gave birth to it again. The sky became a living being, both mother and tomb. endless and radiant. Below her, Geb's laughter grew into mountains. His tears became the rivers. The world took shape from divine emotion. Adam watched the balance unfold. For the first time, there was order, the law of harmony that would govern gods and men alike. The stars moved in perfect rhythm. The air caressed the land. The water kissed the shore. And in that symmetry, Adam saw beauty. But he also saw fragility. Order could falter. Even the gods could forget the balance that birthed them. And so he called his children together. He spoke the first words of wisdom, words that would echo through millennia. Guard the space between. Without distance, there is no breath. Without longing, there is no love. Without separation, there is no life. From that moment, the Egyptians understood that creation was not a single act. It was a delicate equilibrium. The sky must remain above, the earth below, and the waters contained. Every day, the universe had to be reborn, its balance renewed through action, through reverence. Adam then withdrew into the horizon, no longer alone, but forever watching. In his absence, the younger gods took their places. Shu held up the sky. Tefnut nourished the air with moisture. Geb gave birth to trees and beasts, and Nut cradled the stars. Every motion of the cosmos was his legacy, a living reflection of his self-creation. But creation was not yet complete. There was still silence beneath the stars, still darkness between the breaths of the gods. From this stillness, two new powers would emerge, light and shadow, harmony and conflict. Their names would be Osiris and Set, brothers destined to shape both heaven and the earth below it. For now, however, peace reigned. The air shimmered with light, the waters glowed beneath the sky, and the first humans began to stir within the fertile soil of Geb's body. They rose, blinking into the dawn, unaware that they were walking upon a god's skin, breathing a god's air, and living beneath the goddess's womb. They built small fires and watched the smoke rise toward Nut stars. In that smoke, they saw messages, dreams sent upward to the divine. And so began humanity's oldest conversation, the dialogue between earth and sky. To the Egyptians, this story was not fantasy, it was memory. The gods had not vanished into myth. They were the world itself. The air was Shu. The dew was Tefnut. The warmth of the ground beneath one's feet was Geb's pulse. And the vast dome of blue overhead was Nut's eternal embrace. Adam's loneliness had given birth to all that exists. His self-creation became the seed of all creativity. Every artist, every builder, every priest, every pharaoh who dreamed of leaving something behind was, in their own way, repeating Adam's act, bringing order from chaos, meaning from silence. And though the world would change, though kingdoms would rise and crumble into dust, the Egyptians would never forget that the first god's breath still lingered in their lungs. When the sun rose each morning, it was Adam awakening. When it sank each evening, it was Adam returning to himself, preparing once more to dream the world into being. Before the first temple was built, before even Adam had shaped the sky and earth, there existed a deeper current of divinity, older than any god who would later walk upon the land. In the city of Hermopolis, far to the south where the waters met the horizon, the priests spoke of the Ogdoad, 8 primeval beings who existed before time, before light, before form. They were not gods in the way humans would later imagine them, but principles, vast, cosmic forces that swam through the darkness like waves in an eternal ocean. 4 pairs, male and female, serpent and frog, representing the dual nature of all things. Each pair whispered the language of creation. Nun and Nonnet, the endless waters from which everything emerged. He and Ha-He, infinity and its boundless expanse. Kek and Kakit, darkness and the hidden potential it concealed. Ammonius and Amanet, the unseen and the mysterious power that breathes within all. Together, they formed a circle, not of chaos, but of anticipation. They dreamed in silence, their very thoughts rippling across the void. And from their dreaming came vibration. From vibration, sound. And from sound, light. The priest said that in their dreaming, a spark formed at the heart of the waters. It rose like a heartbeat, pulsing beneath the surface of eternity. This spark became an egg, shining with all the possibilities of creation, the first sun waiting to be born. When the egg cracked, light spilled into the abyss. From it rose a bird, magnificent and golden, the Bennu, the first soul, the herald of dawn. It spread its wings and sang a single note, so pure that it echoed through the still waters and gave them form. The universe was no longer a dream. It was awake. The Ogdoad watched as the light grew stronger, and in that light, they saw themselves reflected. For the first time, the Eternal understood the beauty of impermanence. They knew they would soon fade, absorbed into the pattern of creation they had imagined. But that was their purpose, to dissolve so that others might exist. The Egyptians later said the Ogdoad never truly vanished. They became the hidden foundation beneath all things, the unseen rhythm that sustained the cosmos. Each day, as the sun rose over the horizon, their silent song could still be heard in the rustle of palm leaves, in the hiss of the wind through the reeds. In the temples of Hermopolis, priests carried vessels of sacred water representing the primordial flood. They would stir it gently, whispering hymns to the Eight who once stirred the void. Each ripple in the basin symbolized a new beginning, a fragment of the ancient dream still unfolding. To the Egyptians, creation was never a single moment. It was a pulse, an infinite cycle of rising and sinking, of dreaming and awakening. The Ogdoad were that pulse, the deep breath beneath existence itself. And though later gods would gain names, temples, and crowns, the priests never forgot who had first imagined the world. The Ogdoad were the memory of beginnings, the shadow behind every sunrise. In art, they were seldom shown, for how could one depict the formless? Instead, their symbols adorned temple walls. The lotus, which bloomed each morning from the dark waters. The frog, herald of life and fertility. The serpent, symbol of infinite return. Each reminded the faithful that even the brightest light owes its life to the dark that came before it. At dusk, when the desert turned gold and crimson, the people believed the Ogdoad stirred once more. The waters of Nun whispered again, calling the sun to rest beneath the western horizon, where it would be reborn at dawn. Every sunset was a rehearsal of that first cosmic night, and every dawn a resurrection of the divine dream. Through the centuries, the story changed its form, sometimes spoken, sometimes sung, sometimes etched into stone. But the essence endured, that life is the result of dreaming, that everything visible is born from the invisible, that creation is not a command, but a yearning, a quiet wish spoken by eternity itself. When the priests stood before their altars, eyes closed, voices trembling with devotion, they imagined those 8 ancient forces still circling the universe, watching over the fragile order they had birthed. And in that moment, they felt the truth of all Egyptian faith, that the sacred was not far away, but flowing through every grain of sand, every heartbeat, every wave of the river. The Ogdoad were not gone. They lived in the silence between breaths, in the hush before the morning call of birds. They were the unseen hands that lifted the sun each day, the ancient dreamers who never truly woke, forever shaping the world with their sleeping thoughts. And as long as the Nile flowed, as long as the stars traced their eternal paths across the black sky, Egypt would remember them, the 8 who dreamed the world. In Memphis, the white-walled city rising from the Nile's edge, the priest spoke of a god unlike any other. He did not create the world with his hands, nor shape it from clay, nor birth it from the waters. He spoke it into being. His name was Ta, the silent maker, the mind behind all motion. To the Memphite theologians, creation was not an act of force, but of thought. They imagined Ta standing in the stillness of pre-existence, his eyes closed, his heart awake. Within him, all things already existed, stars unborn, rivers unwritten, destinies unspoken. He needed only to imagine them, and when he did, they were. In their theology, the heart was not a symbol of emotion, but of understanding. the seat of reason, of imagination, and the tongue was its instrument, the bridge between idea and reality. Thus, the priest said, it was through the heart that Ptah conceived the world, and through the tongue that he commanded it to be. When Ptah thought of light, the sun flared into existence. When he imagined water, the Nile flowed forth. When he dreamed of life, the gods themselves were born. Even Adam, who had risen from the waters, was said to have come from Ptah's first word, the word that divided silence from song. The temple of Ptah stood as a living echo of this belief. Every wall carved with lines of devotion, every statue a frozen syllable in stone. To speak the names of the gods was to awaken them. To carve their likeness was to give their essence shape. For the Egyptians, the spoken and the sculpted were the same act. Both were language made real. They believed that words had weight, that every syllable carried a fragment of Heka, divine power. To utter something carelessly was to distort the world. To speak truth was to heal it. Even the smallest prayer, whispered by a farmer to his field or a mother to her child, was a thread woven into Ptah's great tapestry of existence. And so, silence became sacred, not emptiness, but potential. The pause before a word was the space where creation gathered its strength. In that stillness, Ptah waited, the god of the craftsmen, of builders, of thinkers. His hand was steady, but his power lay in intention. It was said that every artisan in Egypt was a reflection of Ptah, that when a sculptor struck stone or a scribe drew hieroglyphs, they were reenacting his divine act. Creation, to them, was not invention, it was remembrance. Each work of beauty was a rediscovery of what already existed in the divine mind. Thus, the pharaohs themselves, though seen as living gods, bowed to Ptah's principle. For even a king's command was only powerful if it carried truth, if it was spoken in harmony with the cosmic order. A false decree could unravel Maya, but a true word could move armies, calm storms, and bridge the worlds of gods and men. The priests of Memphis saw in this theology a message deeper than religion, that the mind was divine, that thought and speech together could shape destiny. The same principle that brought forth the stars could bring justice, invention, poetry, and wisdom. The world, they believed, was language made visible, a sentence still unfolding across eternity. When night fell and torches flickered along the temple columns, they recited the hymn of Ptah, a rhythm both intellectual and holy. He who gives form to the formless, who calls the unspoken by name, who shaped the gods with his word, and men with his craft, all that is, was first imagined by him. Somewhere, beyond the chant, they imagined Ptah's presence, not loud or blazing like R.A., but quiet, radiant, patient. He was the calm in creation's storm, the voice that spoke once and has never stopped echoing. To the people of Egypt, this was not abstract philosophy. It was a way of life. When a man promised something, his words bound him before heaven. When a scribe wrote a prayer, it lived forever, immortalized in ink and meaning. And when the Nile returned each year, it was said that Ptah had whispered to the waters again, "Rise." Centuries later, even as new gods rose to prominence, Ptah's secret endured. In every workshop where chisels rang, in every prayer spoken at dawn, in every decree carved into the walls of tombs and temples, his power lived on, the sacred reminder that thought shapes reality. And so the Egyptians built, wrote, sang, and dreamed, believing that each act of creation, however small, was a repetition of that first divine utterance, a continuation of the God who turned silence into being. And though time would erode the temples, though wind would strip the faces from statues, one truth would remain, eternal as the desert sky. The world is not only made of stone and light, it is made of words. In Egypt, creation did not happen once. It happened everywhere. Each city, each sacred ground, told its own version of the beginning, not in rivalry, but in harmony. For the Egyptians, truth was not a single line. It was a woven cloth of many colors. Each thread shimmered with the light of its own revelation, and when seen together, they formed a single radiant tapestry. the story of life itself. At Heliopolis, priests told of Adam, the self-created one who rose from the waters of none. He stood on the first mound, bathed in the glow of his own light, and from his divine essence birthed the world. Heliopolis became the city of the sun. Its temples aligned with the morning light, its rituals timed to the heartbeat of dawn. There, the priests worshipped the Benben stone, a pointed pillar representing that first mound. They said it shimmered with the energy of creation, a reminder that every sunrise was a reenactment of the world's first awakening. Far to the south, in the island city of Elephantine, another story flowed from the river's mist. Here, creation began not with light but with water, and the potter god Khnum, the patient artisan of existence. He sat by the edge of the Nile, shaping life from clay upon his wheel. Each rotation formed men and women, animals and gods, molded with care, baked in the warmth of the sun. When he finished one, he breathed into it, giving it the spark of soul, the Ka, the vital essence that would endure beyond death. To the people of Elephantine, this was no distant myth. Every birth, every stirring of breath in a newborn's chest, was Khnum at work again, unseen but ever present, turning the wheel of creation with quiet precision. In the city of Sais, another vision bloomed beneath the gaze of Neith, the primordial weaver, mother of the gods, and goddess of the unseen. They said that in the beginning, she sat alone in the darkness, her fingers weaving the threads of the universe out of silence. Every star, every soul, every grain of sand, all part of her tapestry. When her work was complete, she smiled and spoke the first truth. I made all that is. I made it alone. Her priests taught that Neith's web still stretches across existence, connecting the seen and unseen, the living and the dead. When a person acted with justice, their thread glowed bright. When they strayed into chaos, their strand dimmed. And so, human life became part of her eternal weaving. Meanwhile, in Thebes, a mystery deeper still unfolded. The god Ammonius, whose name meant the Hidden One, was said to have existed before all things, unseen, unheard, unknowable. He did not rise from the waters, nor speak creation aloud. He simply was. From his hidden essence, all forms emerged like ripples from an invisible wind. To the priests of Thebes, this mystery was sacred truth, that what is unseen is often the source of all that is visible. Thus, Ammonius became the god of both silence and revelation, his temple veiled in shadow, his name whispered rather than declared. Even Memphis, Heliopolis, Thebes, and Elephantine, though separated by distance and language, did not compete. Each city's creation was true within its own horizon. Each god reflected an aspect of a larger truth, that creation is not a single act, but a living cycle, reborn with each sunrise, each flood, each breath. The Egyptians never saw contradiction in this multiplicity. To them, divinity was not a fixed image, but a living current. Just as the Nile divides and rejoins, truth could take many paths and still flow from the same source. Each god, each myth, was a mirror reflecting a fragment of the whole. As centuries passed, these different visions began to intertwine. The priests, seeking unity, wove together the stories of the gods, forming great composite deities. Ammonius Ra, the hidden sun, Tasokro Osiris, the god of rebirth, Horikti, the merging of light and sky. In them, the Egyptians found a perfect balance, the visible and invisible, life and death, creation and renewal. When the sun rose above the horizon, the people saw not one god, but many faces shining in the same light. Adam's first dawn, Khnum's clay, Neith's web, Ta's word, all of them parts of a single truth, that the universe is both mind and matter, both breath and body, both spirit and form. And in that harmony, the Egyptians discovered their most sacred understanding, that the divine could never be contained by one story, one temple, one name. It was everywhere, in the craft of the potter, in the voice of the scribe, in the hands of the weaver, in the breath of a newborn child. Creation was not something that had happened. It was something that was happening still. Every prayer, every heartbeat, every rising of the Nile was another thread spun upon Neitha's loom, another pot turned upon Khnum's wheel, another word whispered by Ptah into the silence. And so, from north to south, from temple to field, the people of Egypt learned to live as creators themselves, participants in the divine act that never ended. For in the land of the Nile, to live was to shape, to speak was to make, and to believe was to weave your own thread into the endless fabric of eternity. When the world first took form and the first light kissed the Nile, creation did not rest. It began to breathe, to multiply, to love. From the first acts of the creator Adam, the self-born, who rose from the waters, came Shu, god of air, and Tefnut, goddess of moisture. They were the first rhythm of existence, breath and mist, wind and dew. Together, they filled the void between sky and earth with the living pulse of the world. But even divine children can wander. Shu and Tefnut were said to have strayed into the endless darkness of none, vanishing from their father's sight. Adam, alone upon the primeval mound, called for them across eternity. In his grief, he sent forth his eye, the first manifestation of divine will, to seek them, that I became a goddess of blazing power, sometimes Hathor, sometimes Sekhmet, whose tears and fury could heal or destroy. When she found the lost children and brought them home, Adam wept in joy, and from those tears, it was said, humanity was born. Thus, before gods ruled heaven, the Egyptians imagined themselves born from divine sorrow, not as slaves of the gods, but as their reflections, shaped from both love and longing. From Shu and Tefnut came Geb, the earth, strong and fertile, and Nut the sky, graceful and eternal. They loved each other fiercely, so fiercely that their embrace threatened to smother the space between them. Their father Shu was forced to pry them apart, lifting Nut into the heavens and pressing Geb down beneath. From their separation came everything that exists between, the air we breathe, the light of dawn, the realm of life itself. And though they were torn apart, Nut still bends down each night to kiss her husband's face. Her body, studded with stars, arches above him, and when the sun sets, she swallows it whole, only to give birth to it again in the morning. In that eternal gesture, the kiss of heaven and earth, the Egyptians saw the rhythm of love and death, loss and reunion, woven into the very structure of the cosmos. From that union of sky and earth were born 5 children, names that would echo through the next 3,000 years. Osiris, lord of the green lands and renewal. Isis, mistress of magic, wisdom, and love. Set, god of the storm, of desert winds and chaos. Nephthys, guardian of twilight and shadow. And sometimes Horus the elder, the falcon of the horizon. These divine siblings became the blueprint of every human family. Love and envy, devotion and betrayal, all reflected in their celestial drama. Osiris and Isis ruled together as king and queen of the fertile lands, bringing order, law, and abundance to the people. Under their reign, the Nile flowed gently, fields ripened with grain, and men learned to live in harmony with the gods. It was an age of peace, the golden era that Egyptians would forever look back upon as the first kingdom. But no paradise endures untouched. From the red lands beyond the river came their brother Set, wild, powerful, and restless. Where Osiris embodied green life, Set was the color of the desert, raw, fierce, necessary, and destructive. He loved his brother, but also envied him, and envy among gods is never small. What began as divine kinship would become the foundation of Egypt's greatest myth, the tale of betrayal, death, and resurrection that mirrored the flood and ebb of the Nile itself. The gods would bleed, the earth would mourn, and through it all, the cycle of renewal would be born. But for now, in this age of dawn, the divine family stood in fragile harmony. The sky stretched above, the earth rolled below, and between them, the first human voices rose in praise. in temples and shrines along the riverbanks. Priests whispered the genealogy of heaven, a lineage not of war and conquest, but of balance, air and water, sky and earth, love and storm. Even the simplest farmer in the delta understood these truths. When he looked up at the stars, he saw Nut stretched across the sky, her body sheltering the world in luminous silence. When he tilled the soil, he touched Geb's flesh. When he felt the wind brush his cheek, he whispered thanks to Shu. And when dew settled on the crops at dawn, he bowed to Tefnut, the mother of moisture and breath. In their hearts, the people of Egypt carried this divine family like their own ancestry. Each sunrise was a birth, each sunset a death, and every season a retelling of the gods' eternal story, the story that bound heaven, earth, and humankind in a single sacred circle. And so the family of the gods grew not through power, but through pattern. They were not distant rulers, but cosmic kin, their joys and losses reflected in the Nile's rise and fall, in the seed's death and the harvest's return. It was through them that Egypt came to understand the greatest mystery of all. That creation was not a single moment, but an unending relationship, a web of love and loss so vast that even the gods could not escape its pull. And soon, that love would be tested, for one brother's jealousy was about to shatter paradise, and in its ruins, the Egyptians would discover the meaning of immortality. There was a time when the world was perfect. The Nile flowed in harmony with the seasons. The people sang songs of gratitude beneath the sun, and Egypt, green and alive, seemed untouched by sorrow. At the center of this harmony stood Osiris, the Green King, firstborn of Geb and Nut, ruler of the fertile lands, a god whose heart beat in rhythm with the river itself. He taught humanity the ways of planting and harvest, the balance between water and earth, the meaning of Ma'at, order, justice, truth. Beside him stood Isis, his beloved sister and queen, a woman of unshakable will, whose wisdom outshone even the sun. Together, they reigned not through fear, but through example. They ruled as parents, not as masters, and under their watch, the world blossomed. But in the red lands beyond the black soil, where the winds howled and the sun scorched the dunes, another heart stirred. Set, Osiris's brother, watched the world with envy. He ruled the desert, the wild storms, the barren edge of creation. He saw Osiris crowned in emerald fields, while his own realm remained silent and dry. And envy, even among gods, is a seed that grows quickly. At first, Set hid it behind laughter. He joined Osiris's feasts, toasted his rule, even praised his justice. But each smile was a mask, and behind it, the storm god whispered to himself, "Why should he rule the green lands while I am left to dust and wind?" And so, Set began to plot. He built a chest of wondrous craftsmanship, its sides inlaid with gold and cedar, its surface carved with sacred symbols. It was no ordinary chest. It was shaped to the exact dimensions of Osiris's body. When the king saw it, he marveled at its beauty. At a grand feast, Set brought it forth and said, "Let this be a gift for whichever among us fits it best." One by one, the guests, gods and nobles alike, tried to lie within it. None fit. Laughter filled the hall. Then Osiris, smiling, stepped forward. He laid down in the chest, and as he did, the laughter died. Set's eyes flashed like lightning. With a shout, he and his followers slammed the lid shut, sealed it with molten lead, and hurled it into the Nile. The chest drifted away, carried north by the current. Osiris trapped within, the god of life swallowed by the waters he once ruled. When Isis heard what had happened, the world itself seemed to stop breathing. The sun dimmed. The Nile grew quiet. Even the wind refused to move. She tore her robes and set out to find her husband, not as a queen, but as a wife, as a soul who would defy gods and death alike. She searched across lands and seas, guided only by faith and grief. In the marshes of Byblos, she found the chest, entwined within the roots of a great tamarisk tree. She fell to her knees, her tears mixing with the salt of the waves. She opened the chest and found Osiris, still, silent, beautiful. She held him and wept until the world began to move again. But Set was not finished. When he learned that Isis had found the body, rage consumed him like fire. He stole into the night, tore open the chest, and hacked Osiris into 14 pieces, scattering them across the length of Egypt, casting them into the river, the marshes, the sand. It was the first murder, and from that moment on, even gods could die. Yet Isis did not despair. She gathered the fragments, one by one, through storm and flood, through grief and exhaustion. With the help of her sister Nephthys and the jackal-headed Anubis, she reassembled the broken body of her love. She wrapped him in linen and perfume, spoke words of power, and breathed life into him once more. The earth trembled, the Nile rose, and Osiris opened his eyes. He could no longer remain among the living, for death had already claimed part of him. But he did not fade into nothing. Instead, he descended into the Duat, the underworld, and there he became its ruler, the god of renewal, rebirth, and eternal life. Every seed that fell into the soil was now his body. Every flood that revived the fields was his breath. Every human soul that died followed his path, seeking judgment and resurrection beneath his watchful gaze. Through his death, Egypt learned its greatest truth, that life and death are not enemies, but companions, that to be buried is not to be lost, but to be planted, and that the green of spring is born only from the black of morning. From that day forward, every pharaoh became an Osiris in death, and every sunrise was his resurrection. The people looked to the east each morning and whispered, "He rises again." And in that light, they understood what immortality truly meant, not the escape from death, but the promise that even in the darkest night, life will always find a way to return. The Nile ran red that season, not with blood, but with the reflection of a sky torn open by storms. The earth remembered the murder of Osiris, and the heavens wept with his widow. From her mourning and her magic, Isis bore a child, a falcon-eyed boy destined to avenge his father and restore the balance of the world. She named him Horus, but his birth was a secret. Set, now the usurper king, ruled Egypt with iron and flame. He hunted the child day and night, sending spies into the reeds and jackals through the villages, seeking the one who would someday challenge his reign. So Isis hid her son in the papyrus marshes of the Nile Delta. She raised him in whispers and wind. At dawn, she taught him the songs of Ra, and at dusk, she spoke to him of his father's courage. At night, the goddess Nephthys watched over them, while Anubis guarded the threshold between life and death. Sometimes, when the storms raged outside their hiding place, Horus would cry, frightened by the thunder. Isis would hold him close and whisper, "Do not fear the storm, my son. It only rages because it knows you will end it." Years passed. The boy grew into a warrior with eyes like twin suns. His feathers shimmered with gold, his gaze sharp as a blade. Every night, he dreamed of Set, of a throne that was not his, of a kingdom crying out for justice. And when the time came, Horus rose. He appeared before the assembled gods at the court of Ra, standing proud before the Ennead, the great council of 9 deities who ruled divine order. His voice was calm, but his words were fire. "My father was slain. My mother wept. The world has fallen into chaos. I claim the throne that is rightfully mine." The gods murmured. Set, standing at the other side of the court, smiled with disdain. He was powerful, magnificent, terrifying, the color of the desert wind, the shape of a beast with no name. "This boy," he said, "is weak. He hides behind a mother's skirts and dares to challenge me. Let him prove himself, not with words, but in battle." And so began the contending of Horus and Set, the longest, most legendary struggle in all Egyptian myth. For 80 years, the two gods clashed across heaven and earth. They fought as men, as beasts, as storms. They took the forms of lions and crocodiles, of serpents and falcons, their battles shaking the desert and the river alike. In one tale, they transformed into hippopotamuses and plunged into the Nile, fighting beneath the surface for 3 days and nights. The waters boiled with their fury. When they emerged, Set struck out Horus's left eye, shattering it into fragments that fell across the sky. The moon, broken and dim, but the god Thoth, master of wisdom and writing, gathered the pieces and restored the eye, making it whole again. That eye, the Wedjat, became the symbol of healing, a sign that even what is broken may be made strong again. Other stories tell of cunning and deception. Set tried to trick Horus with lies and traps, while Isis, with her brilliant magic, devised ways to outwit Set in return. Once, she caught him in chains made of his own words, and even the great storm god bowed before her wisdom. But when she took pity on him and freed him, Horus, enraged, struck at her, his anger blinding him to mercy. For that moment of wrath, the gods rebuked him. Justice, they reminded him, must never be born of hatred. At last, weary of the endless war, the gods convened once more. They turned to the ancient sun god Ra for judgment. The Old One gazed down at the two rivals, Set, scarred by fury, Horus, tempered by grief, and he saw that the balance must be restored. Set, said Ra, you shall rule the deserts and the storms. Horus, you shall inherit the throne of the Black Land, the fertile kingdom of the Nile. And so it was. The Red Land and the Black, the Chaos and the Order, were divided between them. But Horus, crowned with the double crown of Egypt, became the living embodiment of divine kingship. Through him, the line of pharaohs began, each one a mortal vessel of the falcon god's power, each one a promise that order would always rise again after the storm. In temples and tombs across the ages, the story of Horus and Set was carved into stone, not as a tale of victory and defeat, but as a mirror of existence itself. For chaos and order must always contend. Without the desert, the Nile would overflow. Without the storm, the air would grow still. The Egyptians understood this truth, that harmony is not peace without struggle, but balance born from the eternal dance of opposing forces. And so, as the dawn broke over the river once more, the people lifted their eyes to the sky and whispered, Horus is risen, the storm has passed. But in the distance, beyond the dunes, thunder still murmured, a reminder that Set never truly vanished. He waited, as all storms do, for the day when the balance would shift again. The war of gods had ended, but its echo lived on in every sunrise, in every heartbeat of the Nile. From the triumph of Horus came a new idea, one that would define Egypt for 3,000 years, that the ruler of the land was not merely a man, but the living embodiment of the divine. The pharaoh was born. When the sun rose over the horizon, its first rays touched the golden crown of Egypt's king, and the people whispered, Horus walks among us. To them, the pharaoh was the son of Ra, the heir of Osiris, the living Horus, the bridge between gods and men. He was not worshipped for himself, but for the divine power he carried, a flame that passed from one ruler to the next, as eternal as the cycle of day and night. When a new pharaoh ascended the throne, his coronation was more than ceremony. It was transformation. In the temple's inner chamber, priests recited the ancient words that joined the mortal and the eternal. The king stood before the sacred statues of the gods, bathed in incense and the song of sistrums. Then, before all of Egypt, he was crowned with the double diadem, the white of Upper Egypt and the red of Lower, symbol of unity, symbol of divine right. From that moment on, he was no longer a man. He was Horus, protector of the land. He was the breath of Ma'at, the living law that kept the world in balance. Every act of the pharaoh carried cosmic weight. When he prayed, the gods listened. When he offered food in the temples, it was as if the gods themselves were being nourished. Through his rituals, the sun rose, the Nile flowed, and the stars returned to their places in the sky. This was not metaphor. To the Egyptians, it was fact. The pharaoh's rule sustained the rhythm of existence. Without him, chaos would seep in, the flood would fail, and darkness would reclaim the world. In the grand temples of Karnak and Luxor, his image towered beside the gods. In walls carved with gold and lapis, he struck down the enemies of order, offered gifts to Ra, and stood shoulder to shoulder with Osiris, Isis, and Horus. Every temple, every statue, every monument was not a testament to royal ego, but an act of divine maintenance, a way of keeping the universe itself in motion. But even a god must remember the weight of humanity. At night, when the offerings were done and the hymns had faded, the pharaoh walked alone through his palace. Outside, the Nile whispered. He would look to the stars and wonder if his ancestors watched from the fields of eternity. He would think of Osiris, who had ruled with love, and of Set, whose rage still haunted the desert. And perhaps, for a fleeting moment, he would feel the same doubt that stirs in every human heart. Yet even doubt had its place in Egypt, for the pharaoh's duty was not perfection, but balance. He was both mortal and divine, born of a woman, yet crowned by the gods. His strength was in holding both truths without breaking. Every morning, as he stood in the temple of Ra, he performed the sacred act of renewal. He broke the clay seal of the god's shrine, washed the statue with pure water, offered bread and beer, and bowed his head before the image of the sun. In that moment, he was not only king, he was priest, guardian, servant. Through him, the gods continued to dwell among the living. Even his death was not an ending. When a pharaoh died, his soul became Osiris, lord of the afterlife. The new king, his son, became Horus in turn. Thus the cycle continued. Horus became Osiris, and Osiris was reborn through Horus. Father and son, death and life, a pattern as eternal as the Nile's flood. In this way, Egypt endured, while kingdoms rose and fell beyond its borders, while deserts shifted and empires turned to dust. The line of pharaohs remained, not as men, but as symbols of an unbroken divine order. The common people understood this not as tyranny, but as harmony. When they labored in the fields, they said they worked under the gaze of Horus. When they prayed for rain, they offered it through the voice of their king. The pharaoh's justice was their safety, his virtue their prosperity, and so they carved his name into stone, built monuments that touched the sky, and filled the air with songs of his eternal reign. Yet beneath the gold and the ritual, there always lingered a quiet truth, that even the living God was still bound to the law of Maya, to the same fragile balance that ruled all creation. He might command armies and summon temples, but he could not command the flood, or silence the winds, or escape the judgment that awaited every soul. For when his body failed, the pharaoh too would stand before Osiris, stripped of crown and name, to have his heart weighed against the feather of truth, and if it was found pure, he would pass into the eternal fields, his soul sailing with Ra upon the morning sun. If not, his name would be erased from every stone, and his spirit cast into shadow forever. Even gods, it seemed, could be forgotten, and so the pharaoh ruled not only for glory, but for remembrance. Every monument, every temple, every scarab carved with his name was a prayer against oblivion, a whisper into eternity. I have kept balance. I have upheld Ma'at. Remember me. When the body grows silent, when the last breath drifts away like smoke over the Nile, the journey is not over. For the Egyptians, death was not an ending, but a crossing, a passage into the deeper chambers of existence. They called it the Duat, the hidden world beneath the earth, a mirror of life, filled with rivers of fire, fields of light, and shadows that whispered the names of the forgotten. Every soul, whether pharaoh or peasant, had to walk that road, but the path was perilous. Demons prowled the thresholds, serpents coiled in the dark, and gates opened only for those who knew the sacred words. Without preparation, the soul would lose its way, dissolve into chaos, and be devoured by the eternal night. That was why the living prepared for death as they prepared for harvest. To die well was to live wisely, to speak truth, to act with justice, to keep one's heart light. These were not moral slogans, but survival tools for eternity. When the soul departed the body, it was led by Anubis, jackal-headed guardian of the dead, his eyes like twin stars in the night of the tomb. He guided the spirit through corridors of shadow to the great hall of two truths, where Osiris sat upon his throne of lapis and gold. Beside him stood Isis and Nephthys, their wings spread wide like the horizon. The air shimmered with silence. Before the throne stood the scales of justice, the great balance upon which all eternity depended. On one side lay the feather of Maat, symbol of truth, order, and divine harmony. On the other, the heart of the deceased, the sum of their deeds, the echo of their life. If the heart was pure, it would rise, light as air, balancing perfectly with the feather. If it was heavy with deceit, with cruelty, greed, or betrayal, it would sink, and the monstrous Ammit, half crocodile, half lion, half hippopotamus, would devour it whole. That was the second death, the death from which there was no return. But for those whose hearts balanced the scale, a miracle awaited. Thoth, scribe of the gods, recorded the verdict in his scroll of light. He turned to Osiris, and the great god spoke. This soul is justified. Let them into the field of reeds. The soul would then pass into the eternal lands, a mirror of Egypt in its perfect form. There, the Nile flowed forever. The fields never withered, and loved ones waited in the warmth of unending dawn. The dead would plow and feast, sing and embrace, living again in the world they had loved, free from sickness, hunger, and sorrow. But such a destiny required preparation. Egyptians spent their lives ensuring their safe passage. They filled their tombs with food, jewelry, amulets of lapis and gold, and papyrus scrolls covered in spells, words of power from the book of coming forth by day, what we call the Book of the Dead. These spells were not mere superstition. They were maps, directions through the labyrinth of the Duat. One incantation opened the gates guarded by serpents of flame. Another allowed the soul to breathe in the thin air of the underworld. Another taught it the secret names of the gods, so it could speak with authority before them. To the Egyptians, language itself was divine. The right word, spoken with truth, could open the way to eternity. Even the heart, the most human of all symbols, was prepared for the test. Within every tomb, artisans placed a scarab amulet upon the chest of the mummy, engraved with a prayer. O my heart, do not stand against me as witness. Do not weigh heavy upon a scale, for I have done no wrong. I am pure. I am justified. It was both plea and declaration, a whisper into the silence of eternity. In the glow of the afterlife, the pharaoh stood beside the poorest farmer, the merchant beside the soldier. Rank meant nothing here, only truth, only balance. And yet, this was not a place of fear, but of peace. For the Egyptians believed that if one lived in harmony with Maat, there was nothing to dread in death. Life flowed into death, and death flowed back into life, as surely as the Nile returned with each flood. To them, immortality was not the denial of death, but the acceptance of its place in the cycle. The seed must die for the stalk to rise. The sun must set to rise anew. The body must rest for the soul to awaken. So when the priest sealed the tomb, and the light faded from the chamber, the silence was not despair. It was faith. Faith that somewhere beyond the veil, the heart of the departed would rise like the morning sun, and stand before Osiris to speak the final truth. I have not lied. I have not killed unjustly. I have not brought pain. I am pure of heart. Let me live again. And as the scales balanced, and the feather gleamed in eternal light, the god smiled. The journey, they knew, was never truly over. Every evening, as the sun dipped beneath the western horizon, the Egyptians did not see the end of day. They saw the beginning of a battle. To them, the sun did not simply vanish. It descended into the Duat, the underworld, to sail through its hidden rivers and caverns, facing dangers no mortal could imagine. And at dawn, if he triumphed, the sun would rise again, victorious, reborn, radiant. This was the nightly journey of Ra, the eternal traveler, the light that refused to die. At sunset, Ra boarded his solar bark, a golden ship guided by divine oarsmen and guarded by fierce gods. Among them was Set, paradoxically his protector, for only a god of chaos could fight chaos itself. At the prow stood Mot, her feather gleaming even in darkness, for truth must guide the sun through shadow. The gates of the Duat opened with thunder. Each of the 12 hours of night became a new trial. The river glowed red beneath the keel, its waters thick with mystery and flame. In the distance, shadowed mountains breathed fire, and the cries of lost souls echoed like wind in a tomb. In the first hours, Ra passed through the fields of the horizon, where the souls of the righteous greeted him with songs. They held torches to light his path, chanting his names so he would remember who he was. For even a god must recall his purpose when surrounded by darkness. As the ship sailed deeper, the air grew cold, the constellations faded. Ghostly guardians rose from the water, beings half serpent, half flame, demanding the secret names of the gods aboard. Each one had to answer correctly, for names were power in the Duat. To speak falsely was to vanish. Beyond these gates lay the waters of fire, a river of molten light that burned yet purified. The souls of the wicked cried out from its banks, their voices swallowed by the roar of flames. Ra passed over them, silent. Justice was not cruelty. It was the restoration of balance. But in the deepest hour of night, the greatest threat emerged. The serpent Apophis, Apep, the embodiment of chaos and destruction. His coils stretched for miles, his mouth wide enough to swallow the sun itself. Every night, he waited in ambush. Every night, he tried to drag creation back into the void. The air trembled as Apophis rose. The waters split. The solar bark shook. Darkness swallowed the light. But Ra's crew did not falter. Set, the storm god, leapt to the bow, his spear blazing like lightning. He roared defiance, thrusting his weapon deep into the serpent's flesh. The other gods joined the battle. Isis whispered spells of fire. Thoth wrote incantations that bound Apophis's coils, and the souls of the faithful chanted from afar, their voices forming a wall of light. The serpent writhed, hissed, and was cut to pieces. His blood became the red glow of dawn. Yet, as the Egyptians knew, he could never truly die. Each night, he would reform, waiting again for his moment of vengeance. For chaos cannot be destroyed, only defeated again and again. And that was the secret of the cosmos, that even the gods must labor daily to preserve creation. When Ra reached the final gate, the eastern horizon began to shimmer. There, waiting in the darkness, was Khepri, the scarab god of morning. He rolled the glowing sun into place, pushing it up from the underworld into the sky. Ra transformed. The old man of evening became the young god of dawn. He rose again, his bark now the ship of day, his victory lighting the world. Every sunrise was the proof, not of nature, but of divine triumph. The Egyptians looked to the east and whispered prayers of gratitude. He has defeated the serpent. The sun lives. We are safe for another day. And when night came again, they did not despair. They knew he would return to the darkness, to fight the same battle, to sail the same river, to keep the world alive one more time. This was Egypt's secret faith, not in eternal perfection, but in eternal renewal. That life was a cycle of struggle and return, that even the gods must labor against the dark, that every dawn was a victory, and every night a promise kept. So when they painted Ra's journey on tomb walls, a golden ship gliding through stars and serpents. They were not simply describing myth. They were describing the human condition, the endless voyage through shadow toward light, the courage to face the darkness knowing it will come again, and the faith that, if the heart remains true, the sun will always rise. In Egypt, creation was not made with hands. It was spoken. The gods did not build the world with stone or flame. They spoke it into being. Their voices shaped the sky. Their names carved the mountains. Their words turned darkness into light. And so, the Egyptians believed that speech itself carried divine power. They called it Heka, magic sacred utterance, the living energy that bound gods, men, and the cosmos together. To know a name was to hold the essence of a thing. A name was not a label, it was life. To speak it was to awaken it. To write it was to give it permanence beyond time. In the temple schools of priests, scribes learned that every word could open a gate. When they copied hymns or carved prayers into stone, they did not merely record, they activated. Every hieroglyph, every curve of ink, was both art and spell. Even the act of writing a name was a sacred ritual. To erase a name was to kill its spirit forever. And so, when the priests recited the myths of creation, they were not retelling the past. They were renewing the act itself. Each ritual, each chant, was another spark of creation keeping the cosmos alive. This belief gave rise to a culture of transformation. For the Egyptians, nothing was fixed. The gods changed shape as easily as wind changed direction. A falcon became a man, a woman a lioness, a serpent a beam of light. Even death was only transformation, the cocoon before flight. They saw this pattern everywhere. The scarab beetle pushing its ball of earth across the sand. It was Khepri, rolling the sun through the sky. The lotus closing at night and blooming with the dawn. It was the soul reborn, life unfolding again from stillness. Change was not to be feared. It was the law of existence. And those who understood Heka could become part of that law. A priest, by uttering the right spell, could merge with the power of a god. I am Ra, the Shining One. I am Osiris, reborn from silence. Through these words, he did not pretend. He became. Even in death, this principle endured. The Book of the Dead, the Book of Coming Forth by Day, was not a collection of prayers for the dead. It was a manual of transformation. It taught the soul how to shapeshift, how to ascend. Let me become a falcon, that I may fly to the heavens. Let me become a lotus, that I may open with the dawn. Each transformation was a key, another way to navigate the labyrinth of eternity. The magic of Egypt was not illusion. It was alignment. To live rightly, to speak truth, was to move in harmony with the pattern of the gods. To deceive or destroy without reason was to disturb that pattern, to invite chaos. Even the humblest charms followed this rule. Amulets shaped like eyes, scarabs, or ankhs were not mere ornaments. They were concentrated prayers, small pieces of Heka worn on the skin. A mother would hang a charm of Bes, the dwarf god with lion's mane, to guard her child while he slept. A farmer would bury a clay figure of a serpent, to keep the fields free from plague. Every gesture, every carving, every whisper was an act of cosmic conversation. But the Egyptians also knew that power could corrupt. They warned against Isfit, magic used for selfishness, cruelty, or disorder. Such acts broke Ma'at, the fragile balance that held the universe steady. A sorcerer who twisted words for harm risked not only divine punishment, but the unmaking of his own soul. For Heka, like the Nile, gave life and could take it away. Among all gods, none embodied this dual power more than Isis. She was magic itself made flesh, the goddess who used words to reshape destiny. When her husband Osiris was slain, it was her voice that stitched him back together, her breath that called him from silence. But even Isis desired more knowledge. She wanted the secret name of Ra, the most powerful word in the universe. So she gathered a drop of the old sun god's spit, mixed it with dust, and molded it into a serpent. When the snake bit Ra, pain coursed through him, a wound no god could heal. Desperate, he revealed his hidden name to her, and with that knowledge, Isis became equal to the greatest gods. Through her, the Egyptians learned this truth, that wisdom was the path to divinity, that power without understanding was chaos, but knowledge spoken in truth could move the heavens. Every magician, every priest, every poet who came after her walked in her shadow, seeking not to dominate the world, but to know it so completely that they became one with it. And perhaps that is Egypt's most profound legacy, that the divine was not distant or unreachable. It lived in the breath of speech, in the ink of words, in the transformation of all things. To speak truth was to create. To create was to live forever. And so, through spell, through name, through story, the Egyptians defied oblivion, turning language into eternity itself. In the land between river and desert, the Egyptians learned early that survival depended on balance. Too much flood, and the crops drowned. Too little, and the earth turned to dust. They saw in nature the reflection of a greater truth, that creation and destruction were not enemies, but partners in the eternal dance of existence. And so, they imagined gods who were not purely good or evil, but necessary. Each one held a fragment of the world's equilibrium, their powers locked in a cosmic rhythm that sustained everything from the stars to the human soul. At the heart of this balance stood Ma'at, not merely a goddess, but a principle. She was the breath of order, the pattern of justice, the harmony that kept the universe from collapsing into chaos. Every sunrise, every act of truth, every fair judgment was a reaffirmation of Ma'at's presence. Her opposite was Isfit, the force of disorder, falsehood, and decay. Isfit was not a demon lurking in the shadows. It was what happened when balance was forgotten, when arrogance replaced humility, when the heart grew heavy with lies. Even the gods feared Isfit, for it was the seed of dissolution in all things. To preserve Ma'at, the gods themselves had to work in harmony. But harmony in Egypt was never still. It was motion, flood and drought, life and death, peace and storm. Ra, the sun, embodied creation. Each morning, he rose triumphant from the underworld, bringing light and warmth to the world. But each night, he descended again, confronting the serpent Apophis, the embodiment of chaos that sought to devour his flame. Through this endless struggle, Ra renewed creation, not by destroying chaos once and for all, but by keeping it forever in check. Even Set, often branded the god of evil, had his place in this design. Yes, he murdered Osiris and brought grief to heaven and earth, yet he also stood at the prow of Ra's solar bark, defending the world from Apophis's jaws. Only a god of storms could battle the storm of uncreation. Thus, even chaos itself was used by the gods to protect order. In this way, the Egyptians saw morality not as a war between light and dark, but as a balance between forces. Too much order and life stagnates. Too much chaos and it collapses. Only through constant vigilance, through ritual, truth, and compassion, could the scales of the world remain even. Other gods expressed this duality in their very natures. Sekhmet, the lioness, was both destroyer and healer. When humanity rebelled against Ra, she became his wrath, a torrent of blood and fire that swept across the land. But when her fury threatened to consume all life, Ra tricked her with beard dyed red like blood. Drunk and pacified, she transformed into Hathor, the goddess of love, music, and joy. In her story, the Egyptians saw the truth of the heart. That rage and compassion are two faces of the same power, each capable of both ruin and renewal. Osiris too embodied this paradox. His murder by Set brought death into the world, yet his resurrection brought life to the Nile, making him the god of fertility and rebirth. From his decay sprang the grain that fed the people. From his silence rose the wisdom of eternity. Death itself became an act of creation. The same balance flowed through nature. When the Nile flooded, it destroyed, but its destruction nourished. When the desert winds swept across the land, they stripped away, but also protected Egypt from invaders. Even the scorching sun that killed by day gave warmth and light by dawn. The Egyptians did not separate life and death, but saw them as two ends of the same rope, twisting endlessly through the cosmos. Their gods, like their people, were bound to this law, forever creating, forever undoing, forever restoring. To maintain this fragile harmony, the pharaoh performed the rituals of Ma'at each morning. He presented offerings to the gods, recited hymns of truth, and reaffirmed his duty to keep the balance unbroken. For if the king faltered, if greed overtook justice, if pride silenced humility, then Isfet would creep in, the floods would fail, the stars would wander from their paths, the world itself would begin to unravel, and so even the mightiest gods bowed before Ma'at, for she was the law that bound them all. When Ra rose, it was because Ma'at guided his light. When Thoth rode, it was because Ma'at directed his wisdom. When Osiris judged, it was because Ma'at weighed the truth. Without her, the universe would collapse back into none, the endless dark water from which it came. But the Egyptians were never fatalists. They did not cower before the threat of chaos. They honored it. They knew that destruction was not the enemy of creation, but its mirror, that the storm that flattened the reeds was the same rain that made them grow again. To live in Egypt was to live in balance, to act with truth, to love with compassion, to face anger with wisdom. These were the ways to honor the gods and uphold the cosmos itself. And when the sun sank beyond the horizon, the people did not fear the darkness. They knew that Ra would return. They knew that Set would once again stand guard, and Ma'at would steady the scales of existence. For in the heart of the Egyptian world, creation and destruction were not opposites. They were lovers, locked in an eternal embrace, forever giving birth to the dawn. Along the banks of the Nile, where the horizon glows gold at dawn, the Egyptians built their most powerful prayers, not in words, but in stone. Temples rose like mountains, carved not only for the gods, but as gods, embodiments of divine order, frozen in eternal sunrise. To step into one was to leave the human world behind. The air grew cool, scented with incense and stone dust. Columns rose like papyrus, stalks reaching for heaven. Light filtered through narrow slits, falling in golden shafts that moved with the hours of the day, as if the sun itself were performing its ritual. These temples were not designed by whim. Every wall, every statue, every shadow followed cosmic geometry. They were built as mirrors of creation, miniature universes designed to keep the world aligned with the divine. At dawn, sunlight pierced the temple's entrance, striking the sanctuary deep within. This was not chance. It was choreography, a conversation between sky and stone. When the beam illuminated the god's image, the people knew the universe still held together. The temples were more than places of worship. They were engines of renewal. Within them, priests repeated the first acts of creation every day, reciting the same words that once called the world out of chaos. Each morning, they awakened the god's statue with the ritual of the opening of the mouth, washing it with pure water, clothing it in linen, offering bread, beer, and lotus blossoms. It was not merely symbol, it was maintenance. Without these acts, the gods might sleep, and the balance of Ma'at could falter. The greatest of these sacred cities was Karnak, a forest of columns that seemed to breathe light. Here, the god Ammon-Ra ruled in silence. His temple stretched for miles, a labyrinth of sanctuaries, pylons, and sacred lakes, built and rebuilt by kings over 2,000 years. Every pharaoh added a hall, a gate, a statue, not to surpass his ancestors, but to become part of the eternal work. Karnak was not a monument to power, but to continuity. And yet, each temple across Egypt, from Luxor to Philae, from Edfu to Abydos, spoke its own sacred language. Luxor, with its avenue of sphinxes, was the place of divine birth, where the king was reborn as the living Horus. Philae, island of Isis, was a sanctuary of love and resurrection, where pilgrims came to whisper prayers for healing. Abydos, oldest of all, was the resting place of Osiris, where pilgrims believed a single handful of sand could guarantee eternal life. Every temple was a map of the cosmos. The outer courts represented the world of men, the inner halls mirrored the sky, and the hidden sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, was the moment of creation itself. The first dawn sealed in darkness. Only the high priest, or the pharaoh himself, could enter that most sacred chamber. There, in a silence older than words, stood the god's image, not an idol, but a living presence. The priests did not pray to the statue. They served it, fed it, clothed it, so that it could continue radiating divine energy into the world. The people outside could never see the god's face, but they could feel his blessing in the wind that moved across the river, in the rising of the crops, in the warmth of the sun. The temples themselves spoke through their walls. Carved into every surface were scenes of order triumphing over chaos. The pharaoh offering Ma'at to the gods, the serpent of darkness bound beneath his feet, the eternal lotus blooming anew. The walls told stories, not of conquest, but of cosmic maintenance, reminders that civilization itself was an act of ritual. Even their destruction carried meaning. When temples fell to sand, the Egyptians did not see loss. They saw renewal. To decay was to return to none. The primordial waters, a pause before rebirth. And so, long after dynasties vanished, the stones remained, whispering prayers no ear could hear. Modern travelers who walk among these ruins still feel the pulse of something vast. Sunlight slides across hieroglyphs carved 4,000 years ago, and for an instant, time folds. You stand where priests once chanted, where kings once offered their hearts to eternity. The same wind that moved through the papyrus doors moves across your skin. You realize the temple is not dead. It never was. It still breathes. Its stones aligned with the stars, its shadows marking the hours as they once did. The gods may have fallen silent, but their architecture still speaks. It tells you, without words, that the divine can be built, that eternity can be measured, that beauty itself is a form of prayer. In these sacred ruins, Egypt's greatest secret still endures, that by shaping the world with harmony and intention, humans, too, can touch the eternal. On the western bank of the Nile, where the sun sinks each evening into the horizon, the Egyptians built not cities for the living, but cities for the dead. They believed the West was where life crossed into eternity, where the dying sun began its nightly voyage through the underworld. To be buried there was to follow in the path of Ra himself, to die only so that one might rise again. From the humblest pit graves of the earliest farmers to the vast necropolises of Giza, Saqqara, and Thebes, every tomb was a doorway, not a prison. The Egyptians called them houses of eternity. The body might lie still, but the soul would continue its journey, visiting the world of the gods by day, and returning to the tomb by night, like the sun crossing heaven and underworld in endless rhythm. The most majestic of these tombs were the pyramids, stone mountains raised toward the stars. They were not mere monuments of power. They were machines of resurrection. The pyramid's shape, its broad base rising to a single point, was a symbol of the primeval mound, the first land to emerge from the waters of chaos at creation. To ascend it in spirit or in stone was to repeat the act of creation itself, to rise from death into life. Each pyramid was aligned with astonishing precision. Its sides faced the 4 cardinal directions. Its passages pointed to specific stars. When the pharaoh died, his soul, his Ka and Ba, would ascend through these shafts to join the circumpolar constellations, the stars that never set, eternal lights circling forever above the desert sky. To the Egyptians, Those stars were the spirits of the justified dead, the undying kings who kept watch over the world below. Inside, the walls of the royal tombs were covered with texts of power, the pyramid texts, the earliest sacred writings known to humankind. They were spells, hymns, and instructions, meant to guide the pharaoh through the afterlife. They told him what gates to pass, what demons to name, what words to speak to the gods. If the living recited them correctly, they could help the dead ascend into the heavens. But not only kings sought eternity. Over time, this privilege spread. In the Middle Kingdom, the coffin texts appeared, carved on the coffins of nobles and commoners alike. By the New Kingdom, the Book of the Dead became the passport of every believer. Eternity was no longer reserved for pharaohs. It had become the destiny of all who lived in Ma'at. In Thebes, the tombs of the nobles bloomed like gardens of color and silence. Paintings of banquets, harvests, music, and laughter covered the walls. These were not decorations. They were spells of remembrance. By painting a meal, one ensured that meal existed forever. By carving an image of family, one guaranteed reunion beyond death. The afterlife, in Egyptian thought, was not distant or abstract. It was Egypt perfected, a mirror of life without hunger, pain, or loss. And deep beneath the cliffs of Deir el-Bahari and the Valley of the Kings, the pharaohs of a new kingdom hollowed out their eternal palaces. Corridors spiraled downward into darkness, walls covered with scenes from the Amduat, the book of what is in the underworld. In those painted halls, Ra's nightly journey unfolded hour by hour, showing the king what trials he must overcome to be reborn with the dawn. Even death was a map. In the tomb of Seti I, the ceiling glows with constellations. Nut, the sky goddess, arching overhead, swallowing the sun at sunset, birthing it again at dawn. The dead king lies beneath her, his sarcophagus aligned with the stars, his spirit destined to rise through her body. As the sun rises through the horizon, every symbol, every color, every chamber was part of a divine equation to guide the soul, protect the body, and ensure rebirth. To violate a tomb was not theft, it was cosmic violence. The tomb was not a grave, it was a seed, and Egypt itself was its soil. The living visited their dead with offerings, bread, beer, flowers, incense. They spoke the names of their ancestors aloud, for to speak a name was to make it live again. Even the poorest family kept a small shrine at home, a clay image, a cup of water, and whispered prayers to those who had crossed the western shore. For as long as someone remembered your name, you were not truly gone. You continued the cycle, living in the hearts and words of the living. The pyramids still stand, their limestone skin long stripped away, their treasures plundered, their kings turned to dust. Yet they remain undefeated by time. Each dawn, the first sunlight slides across their flanks, and once again they glow like the rising sun itself. 4,000 years later, they still fulfill their purpose. They still rise, not monuments to death, but monuments to the refusal to die. For in Egypt, the stone was never silent. It was always speaking. It said to the desert, to the wind, to the stars, the body may fall, the name may fade, but life always returns. If the temples of Egypt were bones of stone, then wisdom was their blood, flowing quietly beneath every ritual, every hymn, every carved symbol. The Egyptians believed knowledge was sacred, not the possession of mortals, but a divine current that flowed from the gods themselves. To speak without understanding was dangerous. To know without reverence was death. But to unite knowledge with faith, that was the path to eternity. Among all the gods, two held the keys to this hidden world. Isis, mistress of divine magic and compassion, and Thoth, the moon-faced scribe, keeper of all wisdom and measure. They were not the loud gods of battle or thunder. They worked in silence, through words, symbols, and the unseen order of things. The cunning of Isis, queen of heaven, mother of Horus, was more than the weeping widow of Osiris. She was the living mind of creation, the one who understood the secret workings of the cosmos. Her magic, her Heka, was not born from domination, but from knowing. She did not bend the universe to her will. She whispered to it, and the universe listened. When the world was broken by Set's betrayal, it was Isis who restored it. She gathered the torn pieces of her husband's body, stitched them together with her words, and breathed life where there was none. Through that act, she did more than resurrect Osiris. She proved that wisdom could conquer death. But her greatest secret was the power of the name. In Egypt, to know a being's true name was to hold a fragment of their essence. Even the gods guarded their names in silence, for the name was the root of identity, the code of the soul. One legend tells that Isis sought the hidden name of Ra, the oldest of all gods. She desired it not for greed, but because she knew that true power is understanding. So she waited. When the aging sun god walked upon the earth, a drop of his spittle fell to the dust. From it, Isis molded a serpent, a living spell of venom and intent. When it bit Ra, his divine body trembled with agony. No god could cure him. Only Isis, the healer, could help, but she demanded his secret name in return. At last, Ra whispered it to her, the sound that began creation, the word that none but he had ever spoken, and in that instant, Isis became his equal. She learned that to rule the world, one must first learn to listen to it. From that day forward, she was not only queen of heaven, but queen of magic, the embodiment of knowledge born from compassion, the voice of Thoth. If Isis was the heart of divine wisdom, then Thoth was its voice. He was the god of writing, reason, and language, the scribe who recorded the speech of the gods, and taught mankind to preserve memory through words. He was often shown with the head of an ibis, the bird whose beak curved like the crescent moon. For Thoth governed not only knowledge, but time, rhythm, and the cycles of the heavens. By his pen, the laws of the cosmos were written. He measured the length of days and years, balanced the stars, and counted the souls in the afterlife. In the hall of judgment, when a heart was weighed against a feather of Ma'at, it was Thoth who stood beside the scales, recording the verdict in his scroll of eternal truth. But his greatest gift to humankind was language itself, the bridge between thought and creation. With words, humans could remember. With names, they could preserve. With writing, they could make the mortal everlasting. The Egyptians said Thoth invented the hieroglyphs, pictures that did not merely represent sound, but essence. To carve a bird was to call the bird spirit. To write a god's name was to summon the god's attention. In this way, Thoth gave humanity the power to participate in the divine. He also gave the world the Book of Thoth, a mythical text said to contain every secret of heaven and earth. It was said that whoever read it would know the speech of animals, the language of the stars, and the mind of the gods. But it was also said that those who sought it for selfish gain would lose everything, for wisdom without humility leads only to madness. The eternal lesson. Together, Isis and Thoth represented two halves of divine intelligence, intuition and structure, heart and logic, magic and measure. Through them, the Egyptians saw that enlightenment was not conquest, but balance. To live wisely was to live in harmony with Ma'at, to know the laws of the universe, and to act with compassion within them, to speak without cruelty, to learn without pride, to create without greed. The temples of Thoth at Hermopolis and the sanctuaries of Isis at Philae became centers of learning that lasted for millennia. Priests studied the stars, recorded floods, composed hymns, and healed the sick, all acts of sacred knowledge. Even when the gods themselves began to fade, their lessons endured. The Greeks saw in Thoth their Hermes, the messenger and guide of souls, and they named him Hermes Trismegistus, thrice great Hermes, father of all wisdom. From this union was born Hermetic philosophy, which would shape centuries of thought and alchemy. And so, long after the last temple fell, the spirit of Isis and Thoth continued to whisper through scrolls, libraries, and dreams, reminding humanity that wisdom is not found in dominance, but in understanding. For to know the name of a god is not to command him, but to become part of the same eternal thought that spoke the stars into being. Before the temples, before the pyramids, there was the sky. The ancient Egyptians looked upward and saw not emptiness, but a living map, a mirror of the divine order that governed their world. Every light that shimmered above the desert was a god's eye, a spirit, a memory, or a message. Time itself, they believed, was written in the heavens. Above them stretched Nut, the sky goddess, her body arched like a canopy of indigo. Her skin glimmered with stars, and each night she swallowed the sun god Ra, only to give birth to him again at dawn. She was eternity made visible, the mother of time, the endless rhythm of night and day. Beneath her lay Geb, god of the earth, his body green and fertile, his laughter the echo of thunder. Between them, the air god Shu held the heavens aloft, keeping the sky from crushing the land. This sacred space, the gap between heaven and earth, was where life unfolded, and it was measured by the stars, the sacred calendar. For the Egyptians, time was not a straight line. It was a circle. Everything moved in cycles. The Nile's flood, the waxing moon, the birth and death of kings. Their calendar reflected this rhythm, anchored by one bright star that ruled the heavens, Sirius, which they called Sopdet. Each year, after the longest drought, Sopdet appeared in the dawn sky, a single spark of light before sunrise. Within days, the Nile would rise, flooding the fields and bringing life to the land. The Egyptians saw this not as coincidence, but as prophecy. Sopdet's appearance marked a new year, the beginning of the agricultural cycle, and the renewal of life itself. They divided the year into 3 sacred seasons. Ake, the inundation, when the Nile flooded and the world was reborn. Parade, the growing season, when crops sprouted and the earth thrived. Shimu, the harvest, when humans reaped the gifts of the gods. Each season contained 4 months, each month 30 days, and at the end came 5 extra days. The birthdays of the gods, Osiris, Isis, Set, Nephthys, and Horus. These were the days out of time, when the world stood on the edge of creation once more. Time was not something to be endured, it was to be honored. Each sunrise was an act of rebirth, each sunset a preparation for renewal. Even death itself was another hour in the cosmic day. The stars as souls. In the dark stillness of night, the Egyptians saw the stars not as distant suns, but as the souls of the justified dead, the immortals who had passed the judgment of Osiris and taken their place in the heavens. Some stars never rose or set. They circled endlessly around the North Pole, and these were known as the imperishable stars. To become one of them was the ultimate reward, to shine forever, never descending into the Duat. The pharaohs carved this belief into their tombs. Passages were aligned with specific constellations, so that in death, their spirits could ascend to the stars that never died. The Great Pyramid itself points toward Thuban, the ancient North Star, a celestial stairway for the king's soul. Other constellations carried stories of gods and guardians. Orion was Osiris, his belt the 3 jewels of eternity. Beside him rose Sopdet Sirius, his beloved Isis, eternally guiding him through the sky. When Orion disappeared from the heavens each year, the people mourned his death. When he returned, glittering in the east, they celebrated his resurrection. The sky became scripture. Its constellations were chapters of an endless book, retelling the story of creation, death, and rebirth every night. The clock of the gods. The priests of Heliopolis and Thebes studied these movements for centuries. They mapped the heavens, recorded eclipses, and built temples aligned with celestial events. When the sun rose between the twin towers of Karnak on the solstice, they knew the gods had blessed another year of order. Timekeeping was sacred work. To measure the hours was to maintain Ma'at, for if time fell into chaos, so too would the world. They divided the night into 12 hours, each ruled by a star or deity. The same was true of the day. The gods themselves kept the rhythm. Ra in the morning, Horus at midday, Adam at dusk, Osiris in the underworld. Each hour was a link in the eternal chain. To the Egyptians, eternity was not endless duration, but perfect repetition. The comfort of knowing that everything returns. The human connection. Even the humblest farmer understood the heavens. He planted by the moon, harvested by the stars, and looked to Sabdet to know when the flood would come. Children were taught the names of constellations, as they were taught the names of kings. The night sky was both map and memory, a reminder that the same stars had watched over their ancestors, and would one day watch over them. In the end, the Egyptians did not see time as something that destroyed. It was something that healed. It was proof that nothing truly vanished, that the sun, the flood, and the soul all returned. In their appointed hours, when they gazed at the stars, they saw not distance, but continuity, the infinite face of Ma'at herself, woven across the heavens. And so they lived without fear of the dark, knowing that even the night was only another part of the dawn to come. The Egyptians did not only pray in silence, they danced their devotion, they sang their theology. Their calendar was not just a list of days. It was a heartbeat, pulsing with festivals, feasts, and sacred journeys that kept the cosmos alive. To them, worship was not duty. It was participation in creation. Each celebration, no matter how grand or humble, helped the gods renew the world. The year of the gods. Every month, every season, belonged to someone divine. The farmers knew when the flood came. The priests knew when the stars aligned. And both knew what god was to be honored next. When Ake, the season of inundation, arrived, and the Nile spilled over its banks, it was time to praise Hapi, the god of the flood, the blue-skinned bringer of fertility. Villagers threw flowers into the water, sang hymns for abundance, and offered bread and beer on reed boats. The Nile was the body of a god, and its rise meant rebirth. Then came Parade, the season of growth. The fields greened again, and the temples echoed with the festival of Osiris, a ritual drama that told the story of death and resurrection. In Abydos, the sacred city of Osiris, pilgrims gathered by the thousands. Priests reenacted the murder of the god by Set, his dismemberment, and his miraculous revival by Isis. At night, the people lit torches and followed a sacred boat, carrying Osiris's effigy down the Nile, a symbol of the god's passage through the underworld. And when dawn broke, they rejoiced, for Osiris had risen again, and with him all life. This was no mere play. To the Egyptians, it was cosmic maintenance. Each retelling renewed the promise of resurrection. Each chant restored balance to the universe. When the time of Shimu, the harvest, came, it was the turn of Min, the god of vitality and fertility. In Thebes, a great procession carried his statue through the streets, surrounded by banners, dancers, and music. Offerings of fruit and bread filled the air with sweetness. The people laughed, drank, and thanked the gods for keeping their world whole for another year. The beautiful feast of the valley. Among all festivals, one held a special place in the Egyptian heart. The beautiful feast of the valley. It was not about kings or temples, but about connection between the living and the dead. Once each year, during the flooding season, families crossed the Nile from the east bank, the land of the living, to the west, the land of eternity. They carried garlands of lotus and baskets of food. They visited the tombs of their ancestors, cleaned them, repainted their names, and shared a meal among the dead. For a single day, the barriers between worlds dissolved. The ancestors were believed to return, drawn by the scent of incense and the voices of their children. Families picnicked in the tomb courtyards, laughing and weeping, telling stories of those who had gone before. It was not mourning, It was communion, a promise that love did not end at the grave. The living fed the spirits, and the spirits, in turn, blessed the living. Even pharaohs joined this sacred celebration. The statues of Ammonius, Mut, and Khonsu were carried from the temples of Karnak to visit the mortuary shrines of the kings across the river. At sunset, when torches reflected in the Nile, it seemed as if the gods themselves were sailing between life and death, carrying peace from one shore to the other. The Opet festival, renewal of the king. But the grandest spectacle of all was the festival of Opet, each year in Thebes. The image of Ammonius Ra, the hidden sun god of creation, was taken from his great temple at Karnak and carried in a golden boat to Luxor. The journey down the avenue of sphinxes was one of fire, fragrance, and thunder. Drums pounded, priests chanted, dancers whirled in white linen and gold. The people filled the streets, cheering and singing as the god passed. They believed that as Ammonius traveled to Luxor, he visited his human son, the pharaoh, to renew his divine power. The ritual re-established the bond between heaven and earth, between God and king, ensuring that Ma'at, the balance of the cosmos, would hold for another year. At the end of the festival, the god returned upriver in triumph, and the people rejoiced as if creation had just begun again. The rhythm of joy. Through these countless celebrations, large and small, Egyptians lived in harmony with their gods, their land, and their time. Festivals were not escapes from reality. They were affirmations of it. They reminded the people that life, like the Nile, was meant to flow, to flood, to recede, and to return again, even in times of famine or war. The festivals continued. They were the rhythm of endurance, the pulse of eternity inside the mortal heart. And perhaps that is why, after thousands of years, we can still imagine the sound of their music, echoing down the banks of the Nile, a sound not of worship alone, but of life celebrating itself. To the ancient Egyptians, architecture was never just construction, it was creation. When they built, they were not shaping space. They were shaping the cosmos itself, repeating the very act of the gods at the dawn of time. Every temple, from the smallest village shrine to the towering halls of Karnak, was a model of the universe, a sacred diagram in stone, a bridge between heaven and earth, the primordial blueprint. In the beginning, there was only the dark water of none, the infinite sea of potential. Then, from its depths, the primeval mound rose, the first land where the Creator stood and spoke the world into being. Every Egyptian temple echoed this myth. Its floor was the mound of creation, its ceiling the starry body of the goddess nut, and its columns the papyrus, stalks rising from the sacred flood. To walk into a temple was to walk into the moment of creation itself. The deeper you went, the closer you came to the heart of divine order, from the chaos of the outer world to the stillness of the Holy of Holies. The outer courtyard represented the realm of humans. Sunlight, noise, life. The hypostyle hall, with its forest of carved columns, symbolized the marshes of the first dawn. And beyond that, in a dark inner chamber, was the naos, the sanctuary, a small, silent room that contained the god's image. It was the point of creation, the first sunrise repeating eternally. The breath of the builders who shaped these temples were not ordinary craftsmen. They were priests of geometry and breath. Before a single stone was laid, they performed the ceremony of stretching the cord, a ritual as old as the pyramids. Under the stars, the high priest and the pharaoh measured out the temple's sacred axis, using a rope aligned with specific constellations, often Sirius and Orion, the celestial forms of Isis and Osiris. When the line was drawn, they drove the first stake into the earth and declared, "May this house stand as the first land stood in the beginning." Every corner was aligned with the heavens. Every wall carried meaning. The temple did not imitate the cosmos. It was the cosmos, made tangible. The pharaoh, as the living Horus, was the bridge between both worlds. When he laid the foundation stone, it was not a royal gesture. It was a cosmic act, a renewal of creation through human hands. Stone as scripture, the walls of Egyptian temples were alive with writing. Hieroglyphs covered every surface, not as decoration, but as living incantation. The Egyptians believed that to carve a word in stone was to make it eternal. Each hieroglyph carried divine power, the same energy that the gods used to shape the world. Scenes of the king offering Ma'at to the gods were not history or myth. They were rituals frozen in time, repeated perpetually by the mere existence of the carving. As long as the temple stood, the universe remained balanced. The colors, too, were chosen with precision. Blue for the sky, green for rebirth, gold for the eternal flesh of the gods. Nothing was arbitrary. Every pigment, every symbol, was an act of theology. Even the shadows mattered. At dawn, the sunlight would pierce through narrow slits and travel across the temple floor, illuminating statues and inscriptions at exact celestial moments. Solstices, equinoxes, festivals of renewal. Light itself was part of the ritual. The living temple. Temples were not museums of faith. They were living organisms. Each day, priests awakened the gods with hymns, bathed their statues in holy water, dressed them in linen and gold, and offered food, wine, and music. The god was believed to truly inhabit the image within. The inner sanctuary was thus both tomb and womb, a place of deathless stillness where divinity was reborn each morning. Outside in the courtyards, the people waited. They could not enter the holy chambers, but they could feel the pulse of ritual through the sound of drums, the scent of incense, and the procession of banners in the sun. For the Egyptians, this was enough. To see the smoke rise from the temple roof was to know the universe was still in harmony, the echo of eternity. Centuries passed, dynasties fell, but the temples remained. Even when the gods were forgotten, their houses stood like mountains, their hieroglyphs whispering through the wind. When explorers first entered these ruins, they found dust where priests had once sung, but the air still felt charged, as if the stones themselves remembered, for in truth they did. Each block was carved with the intention of eternity, each corridor aligned with the path of the sun. Each pillar bore the breath of creation, and though the voices of the priests are gone, the architecture still speaks. It says what it always said, that the divine is not somewhere far above, but woven into the order of the world. To build in harmony with heaven is to participate in creation itself. That was the secret of Egypt's temples, not monuments to gods, but maps of eternity, drawn in stone. To the ancient Egyptians, a person was not one thing. They were many things woven together. A physical body, a shadow, a name, a heart, a spark of divine essence. And at the center of this intricate design stood two great forces, the Ka and the Ba. Together, they defined what it meant to live, to die, and to rise again. The Ka, the vital double. At birth, every Egyptian received a Ka, a divine twin, an invisible counterpart made of pure life force. It was the breath of the Creator, the spark that made flesh move and eyes see. The Ka was not a metaphor. It was as real to them as blood or bone. When a person ate, their Ka was nourished. When they prayed, their Ka rejoiced. And when they died, it was not the Ka that perished. It was the body that could no longer contain it. The Ka lived on, dwelling within the tomb, awaiting offerings from the living. That is why the Egyptians filled their tombs with food, wine, oils, perfumes, and why they carved lists of offerings on the walls, so that priests and descendants could read them aloud. To speak the words was to feed the Ka. It was not remembrance, it was survival. Without nourishment, the Ka would weaken. Without offerings, it would fade into the shadow realm, restless and hungry. And so, the living had a duty to the dead, to keep their Ka strong, through ritual, love, and continuity. This was not superstition. It was moral architecture. The Ka reminded them that every act of kindness, every prayer spoken, was a bridge between worlds. The Ba, the wandering soul. If the Ka was the double, the Ba was the traveler. It was often depicted as a bird with a human face, a symbol of freedom and identity. The Ba carried personality, memory, and emotion. It was the part of the soul that could weep, laugh, desire, or dream. When a person died, their Ba was released, free to leave the tomb and wander the world. But each night, as the sun set and Ra descended into the underworld, the Ba had to return, to reunite with its Ka. This reunion was essential. Without it, the soul could not achieve completeness, and resurrection would remain out of reach. Through proper burial rites and ritual preservation, the Egyptians ensured that this nightly journey would continue forever. The Ba traveled with the sun, crossed the 12 gates of night, and was reborn at dawn. A microcosm of creation itself. The ancient funerary texts, from the coffin texts to the Book of the Dead, contain dozens of spells to help the Ba navigate these realms. Some gave it wings to fly, others light to see, and still others the knowledge of divine names, to open the gates of eternity. To them, immortality was not a gift. It was a skill, a sacred art learned through preparation, knowledge, and moral purity. The reunion becoming Ak. When the Ka and Ba were finally united in harmony, they formed a third, luminous being, the Ak, the effective one. This was the transfigured soul, shining like a star in the night sky. The Ak was no longer bound by earth or flesh. It could move between worlds, protect the living, and commune with the gods. To become an Ak was the highest state of being, to achieve equilibrium between body and spirit, between memory and divinity. It was said that the Aku, the radiant dead, could appear in dreams, bring rain to the crops, and whisper wisdom to their descendants. Their names were spoken in temples and homes, not as ghosts to be feared, but as ancestors to be honored. The Egyptian did not fear death, because they believed the Ka and Ba were eternal currents. The body might decay, but the soul could always be renewed, so long as one lived in accordance with Ma'at, the great order of truth and balance, the moral architecture of the soul. This dual nature of the spirit also shaped Egyptian ethics. To live well was to prepare for reunion. Greed or cruelty weakened the Ka. Lies and injustice burdened the Ba. And a corrupted heart, heavy with wrongdoing, could doom the soul to be devoured by Ammit in the Hall of Judgment. Thus, moral conduct was not just social virtue, it was spiritual engineering. Each good act strengthened the Ka. Each truthful word lightened the heart. Each moment of compassion polished the soul, for its eventual merging into Ak. When an Egyptian looked at the stars, they saw not distant suns, but souls who had completed this journey. The Ka and Ba united in eternal light, and in that cosmic vision, the greatest secret of Egyptian belief was revealed, that the human being was not merely mortal flesh, but a reflection of the divine order itself, a small universe made in the image of the cosmos. To live rightly was to maintain harmony between the seen and unseen. To die rightly was to continue that harmony forever, even now, across the sands and centuries. You can see this truth carved in tombs and statues. The Ka statues with open eyes, the Ba bird soaring above them, the hieroglyphs whispering prayers for reunion. They remind us of what the Egyptians knew so long ago, that the soul is not a single flame, but two lights that must learn to burn together until they shine as one eternal star. When the Egyptians spoke of the soul, they did not mean something vague and invisible. They meant something structured, sacred, and specific, a constellation of forces that made a person whole. The Ka and Ba were its two main lights, but two subtler forces held them together across time: the Shut, the shadow, and the Run, the name. Without these, no soul could endure. For what is light without the darkness that gives it shape? What is life without a name to call it by? The shadow, the silent companion. Every person, god, and creature possessed a shut, a shadow that followed them like an echo of being. To the Egyptians, this was not just an absence of light. It was a living presence, the trace of divine energy within every form. The shadow was mysterious, a companion both loyal and dangerous. It knew every secret, followed every step, and could not be separated from its owner even in death. In life, the shadow was protection, an extension of the self that moved between worlds. In death, it lingered near the tomb, preserving the connection between body and spirit. When the Ka received offerings and the Ba journeyed through the Duat, the shadow remained, anchoring the self to existence. But because the shadow was powerful, it could also be harmed. To wound the shadow was to wound the person. To destroy it by curse or neglect was to erase a part of the soul. This belief gave rise to countless acts of care. Tombs were designed so that light could fall gently on the statue of the deceased, allowing the shadow to live within sacred illumination. Priests performed rituals to keep the shut safe, ensuring that even the darkness of the self was embraced by divine order. For the Egyptians understood something subtle, that no light exists without shadow, and that the path to eternity must pass through both. The name, the breath of immortality. If the shadow was the body's echo, the run, the name, was the soul's voice. It was not merely a label, but a fragment of divine speech, given at birth and living beyond death. To speak a name was to summon the being itself. To remember a name was to keep a soul alive, and to erase a name, to chisel it from the wall, to let it fall into silence, was the most terrible death imaginable. In the Egyptian world, the afterlife was not automatic. It was maintained through memory. The Ka needed offerings, the Ba needed reunion, and the Ren needed to be spoken. Each time the living recited a name, they renewed the existence of the dead. This is why kings covered their monuments with inscriptions, why nobles carved their names deep into the stone, why even the poorest Egyptian scratched their run onto pottery, hoping it might be read by someone, somewhere, someday. Names were sacred contracts. Even the gods guarded theirs. In the myth of Isis and Ra, Ra's secret name was the source of his power, a word older than creation. To know it was to share in his essence. Thus, to the Egyptians, the name was not identity. It was continuity. It bound past to present, life to death. The most feared punishment in all Egypt was not torture or exile. It was erasure. When a ruler fell from favor, their cartouches were struck from the walls, their statues defaced, their Ren annihilated. This was called damnatio memoriae by later scholars. But to the Egyptians it was something worse, the second death, the unmaking of the soul's existence in all worlds, the eternal equation. The Egyptians saw the self not as singular, but as a sacred equation. Body plus shadow plus Ka plus Ba plus name equals being. Each part was necessary, each part eternal if cared for. The body could be preserved through mummification, the Ka through offerings, the Ba through freedom and ritual, the shadow through protection, and the name through remembrance. Together, they formed a living network, a cosmic circuitry of memory, matter, and meaning. Death, in this understanding, was not disappearance but reorganization, a change of state within a larger pattern. The person did not cease to exist. They changed address within the universe, and when all parts were honored, the individual became a complete being, a soul with gravity strong enough to endure the ages, the whisper across time. Perhaps this is why Egyptian names still echo through history. Khufu, Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, Ramses. Their monuments may crumble, but their wrens still vibrate through the centuries, carried on tongues and books and stories. In that sense, their magic worked. They achieved exactly what they sought, to be remembered. The Egyptians understood something that even our modern age often forgets. That immortality is not about escaping death, but about being spoken of with love. Every time a name is whispered, every time a shadow is cast by candlelight, every time a story keeps a life alive, We repeat their oldest prayer, "Speak my name, that I may live again." And so, across 4,000 years, the ancient Egyptians still exist. In our words, our awe, and our endless fascination, their names live, and through their names, so do their souls. The desert wind sighs through broken temples. The stars shimmer like forgotten gods. And somewhere, deep beneath the sand, a soul begins its journey. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not destruction. It was transformation. The body decayed, but the spirit endured, moving through the underworld as the sun moved through night. Not to vanish, but to rise again. To die was to enter the Duat, the hidden realm beneath the horizon, a vast, shimmering labyrinth where gods, demons, and spirits wove eternity's secret fabric. The gates of the Duat. When the heart stopped, the Ka lingered near the tomb, while the Ba spread its wings and flew into darkness. Guided by spells from the Book of the Dead, the soul navigated 12 great gates, each one guarded by fierce deities who asked riddles, demanded passwords, and tested purity of heart. These were not punishments, but initiations. To pass each gate was to move closer to truth. The dead recited words of power, ancient formulas written on papyri, carved on coffin lids, painted on the walls of tombs. Every spell was a light in the darkness, a step toward becoming divine. The Duat was not a place of torment, but a realm of renewal. The sun god Ra traveled it every night, battling the serpent of chaos, Apophis, so that dawn could come again, and the human soul followed that same path, facing its own darkness, emerging radiant, the hall of two truths. At last, the soul reached the hall of judgment, the place of ultimate reckoning. Before Osiris, the lord of the afterlife, and 42 divine assessors, stood the soul of the deceased. In one hand, the god Anubis held a golden scale. On one side, he placed the heart, the seat of thought and conscience. On the other, he placed the feather of Ma'at, symbol of truth and universal order. Silence filled the hall. The soul trembled as the balance settled. If the heart was lighter than the feather, the person had lived in harmony with Ma'at. With honesty, justice, and compassion, the soul was declared true of voice, Masakuro, and welcomed into eternity. But if the heart was heavy with deceit, the beast Ammit, part lion, part crocodile, part hippopotamus, devoured it whole. This was the second death, the erasure from all existence. It was not hell, nor punishment by fire. It was simply non-being, the loss of name, memory, and shadow, the unraveling of the self. To the Egyptians, this was the greatest fear, to be forgotten by gods and men alike. The fields of reeds. For those whose hearts were light, a new dawn awaited. The gates of heaven opened onto the field of reeds, a mirror of Egypt itself, bathed in endless sunlight and gentle flood. There, the blessed dead worked and feasted, planted crops that never failed, and sailed boats upon tranquil waters. Families reunited, lovers embraced. The gods walked among them as friends. But this paradise was not an escape. It was continuity. The dead lived much as they had before. Because existence itself was sacred, eternity was not a different world. It was this one, perfected. In the field of reeds, the soul joined the company of Osiris, who had himself conquered death. Like him, every mortal could become immortal, not through power or blood, but through purity, devotion, and preparation. And just as Ra rose again each morning, so too did the blessed rise with him, reborn in every sunrise, forever part of the cosmic rhythm, the eternal return. To the Egyptians, immortality was not static. It was motion, the unending renewal of all things. Death and life were partners, each feeding the other. The Ba continued to visit the living. The Ka accepted offerings in the tomb, and the ox shone among the stars. Even in eternity, the soul remained in relationship to the earth, to memory, to the order of the world. Temples, pyramids, and prayers were all built upon this conviction that through care, remembrance, and balance, humans could participate in creation itself. To maintain Ma'at was to sustain the very heartbeat of the universe, and that heartbeat, they believed, was the sound of eternity continuing through them, the legacy of light. Even now, millennia later, their faith endures, not in temples or idols, but in our fascination, our awe, our longing to understand what they understood so well. They built for forever, and somehow they achieved it. Their names still live, their gods still rise with the sun, their wisdom still speaks in the silence of the sand. The Egyptians did not conquer death, they redefined it. To them, eternity was not the absence of time, but its perfect cycle, the endless rising of light after darkness. And so, when we whisper their stories, we take part in the very act they believed kept the world alive. We become the voices that sustain the Ka, the memory that guards the Ren, the breath that awakens the Ba. We become, for a moment, part of their eternity. As Ra rises, so shall we. As Osiris endures, so shall all who remember. The world was made once, and is made again with every dawn. And in that eternal dawn, the ancient Egyptians still walked the shining fields, their souls carried on the wind of forever, living proof that the light of life, properly tended, never dies.